Life in the Middle Ages was a long, scary nightmare that few escaped. Picture a world full of darkness, where death chased you everywhere, hunger tore at your stomach, sickness ruined your body, and unfairness crushed your spirit every day without mercy. This wasn't a made-up story, but the harsh truth for most people in those grim centuries. Farmers weren't seen as human by the rich lords, just tools used like animals. They worked from dawn to dusk in fields they didn't own, forced to give most of their crops to nobles and the church while they starved. If one collapsed from exhaustion, there were dozens to replace them. Life was cheap, and death even cheaper. There were no hospitals, no medicine, no hope. When the Black Death hit Europe, cities turned into mass graves. Rotting bodies were tossed into ditches, and whole families died in their homes with no one to bury them. Some thought the disease was God's anger, so they whipped themselves to beg for mercy. But death came faster. Kings and lords fought for power, and farmers were fuel for their battles. If you didn't die in war, you might be hanged for stealing bread or burned as a witch because a neighbor made a silly accusation. Justice? It was a meaningless word in a world ruled by cruelty and superstition. Knowledge was only for priests, while regular people lived in ignorance. Any different opinion was called heresy, and the punishment was burning or worse. Even science was a sin, and medicine relied on star reading and poisonous mixes. The Middle Ages weren't romantic like some imagine. They were a time of misery and despair. You were either born a lord, lived as a slave, or died unknown like a bug under history's feet. These weren't middle centuries, but an era of pure human suffering. Welcome to this exciting and fun historical episode about life in the Middle Ages. If you're looking for a calm, thought-provoking story that takes you to a dreamlike world, you're in the right place. Before we start our journey through time, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. Feel free to leave a comment and say hello. If you enjoy this kind of relaxing, educational content, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. The thick fog covered the village at dawn, like a blanket of hopelessness. Adhemar rose from his moldy straw bed, feeling familiar pains in his back. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, because work in Lord Geoffrey's field couldn't wait. If he was late, he'd be whipped or lose his tiny share of bread. He looked at his wife, Isabel, still asleep, her pale face showing years of hunger and tiredness. Beside her, their 6-year-old son, Pierre, slept peacefully, unaware his life was already set. He'd be a slave to the land, like them. Adhemar stepped into the freezing cold, barefoot on icy ground. On his way to the field, he passed a body hanging from a tree. Another farmer who tried to escape. It was a warning. Try to run and you die. He sighed, rubbing his sore hands, remembering his father's words. Don't dream of a better life. It's a sin. In the field, he joined dozens of tired farmers, their eyes empty of hope. Even children worked, tiny 5-year-olds carrying loads heavier than themselves. They plowed with crude tools, while the Lord's guards watched with cruel eyes. One kicked a child who fell from exhaustion. The boy cried in pain, but no one dared speak up. At noon, they stopped for their only meal, moldy black bread and watery herb soup. Adhemar sat under a dead tree, eating slowly to ease his empty stomach's ache. He looked at the gray sky and wondered, "Is there a God who hears our cries?" But his question faded into the air, like every farmer's scream before him. A week later, news came that the plague was nearing the next village. Fear gripped everyone. They knew it meant being trapped inside the village until they all died, or being burned alive to stop the disease. At night, as Isabel nursed their baby, Marie, who moaned with fever, Adhemar whispered, "We won't survive this time." But the plague wasn't the worst. The next dawn, Lord Geoffrey's soldiers dragged in a runaway farmer, Louis, Adhemar's childhood friend. They tied him to a post in the village center. The Lord shouted, "This is the fate of traitors," and set him on fire. Louis's screams pierced the sky, but no one moved. Even Adhemar closed his eyes. Eloise held her father's stiff hand in the rain. His body no longer looked like the man she knew, just a skeleton wrapped in skin, as if death stole his flesh before his soul. Around her, dozens of bodies lay in a mass grave, waiting for dirt and lime. The smell of rot mixed with the village's fear, but no one cried. Tears were useless since the Black Death struck. A woman in ragged clothes pulled Eloise's arm. "Come, child, don't touch him. You'll get sick." But Eloise wasn't scared of sickness anymore. She'd seen her mother choke on her own blood a week ago, and her little brother burned with the poor neighborhood's houses because the church thought the poor carried God's wrath. She turned to the woman and asked in a hoarse voice, "Why live if we die like this?" No one answered. That evening, Eloise hid among empty wheat sacks in the Lord's storehouse. She knew getting caught meant being whipped to death, but hunger made her brave. She grabbed a handful of spilled wheat and chewed it with weak teeth. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. Hiding in the shadows, she saw old servant Clara bring a man in monk's robes into the storehouse. He whispered, "The priest says the plague is God's punishment, but I know they're stealing medicine and leaving the poor to die." He pulled a small bottle from his robe. "Take it. It won't cure the plague, but it might ease the pain." Eloise almost jumped out to yell, "Give it to me!" But the sound of guards' horns outside made the man flee. Clara hid the bottle in her clothes and left quickly. Alone in the dark, Eloise felt dizzy. For the first time in months, she felt something strange. Hope. But hope during the plague was dangerous. Days later, word spread that the church found a monk giving out forbidden cures. He was burned in the village square. His body hung on the wall as a warning against defying God's will. Eloise saw the smoke from afar and knew the bottle Clara had might have been her father's last chance. But she didn't run toward the fire. Instead, she picked up a stone and squeezed it until it hurt. She knew stones don't cry, and tears don't feed the hungry. That day, she learned the hardest lesson. In a world where the strong eat the weak, you must become a stone to survive. 10 years later, no one remembered the child Eloise, but they feared the Black Nun, a woman who appeared in plague-stricken villages, carrying secret medicines and vanishing before guards could catch her. They said she healed the sick with a curse deadly to the rich. One night, as the Black Nun slipped medicine into a dying child's mouth, she whispered, Don't be afraid. Death isn't the worst thing in this world. It's living in it as a slave. The sun rose red over the endless wheat fields, not from nature's beauty, but from the fires that devoured the nearby village of Saint Michel last night. Gabriel stood on a small hill, staring at the smoke still rising to the sky. The smell of burnt flesh mixed with damp earth, but it didn't bother him. After 10 years as a feudal soldier, such sights no longer stirred anything inside him. He turned to the tied-up man before him, a skinny farmer who didn't look strong enough to hold a sword. "You're accused of stealing bread from the Lord's storehouse," Gabriel said in a rough voice. The man trembled, fell to his knees, crying and mumbling words that didn't make sense. He knew confessing wouldn't save him, but he tried. "Please, my children are hungry." He didn't finish. With one swing, Gabriel's blade separated the man's head from his body. Blood flowed like a small river, staining the grass under his feet. Gabriel felt no guilt. That was the rule. Stealing meant death. The law served the strong, and the weak had only to obey or die. When Gabriel returned to the castle that evening, loud music filled the great hall. Lord de Montfort was celebrating his daughter's wedding, with wine flowing like water. Tables held deer meat and fancy pies, while thin servants stood like ghosts in the corners, waiting to grab scraps that fell from the Lord's plates. Gabriel sat in his usual corner, drinking quietly. Suddenly, he noticed a young servant girl, no older than 14, watching him from afar. Her blue eyes reminded him of something from his past. "Do you need anything?" he asked sharply. She flinched but stepped closer. "Sir, She paused, then whispered, "You killed my father today." He didn't answer or deny it. He just turned away. Normally, he'd have hit her or reported her to the guards, but something strange made him stay silent. Maybe those blue eyes, or maybe just tiredness. The next night, as he smoked outside the walls, he felt someone behind him. It was the girl, standing in the shadows. "Why are you following me?" he asked, pulling a knife from his belt. "Because I want to learn," she said with surprising boldness. He laughed mockingly. "Learn to kill?" "No." She shook her head. "To learn how not to cry when I see children starve." In that moment, Gabriel felt something odd stir in his chest, something he thought he'd buried years ago. Months passed, and the girl, whose name he learned was Emma, became his shadow. He taught her how to use a knife, endure pain, and read people's faces. In return, she reminded him of things he'd forgotten. His mother's tears when he was a boy, the smell of fresh bread in his poor village, the shame he felt when they kicked hungry dogs in the streets. One night, as they sat on the castle wall, Emma asked, "Why do you kill farmers? You know they're not thieves. They're just hungry." He looked at the twinkling stars. "That's life. You're either the killer or the victim. Are you happy with your choice?" He didn't answer. On a cold morning, strange noise woke him. Outside, the whole village was in the square. In the center, Emma was tied to a post, her body torn from whipping. The priest shouted, "This witch tried to steal medicine from the church." Her blue eyes searched for him, not with fear, but with disappointment. In that moment, something broke inside Gabriel. When they lit the fire, he held the torch. When she screamed, he ordered the executioner to tighten the rope. When her burned body fell, he turned and walked away. But that night, for the first time in 20 years, Gabriel cried. A year later, farmers found a knight's body at the village edge, his sword in his chest, a smile on his face. In his left hand was a fistful of dirt. In his right, a small straw doll. Cold November winds howled through the giant pines around Valteroy village, carrying the scent of coming snow. In a humble hut, Eleonora held her husband René's blistered hand, trying to stop the bleeding that started days ago. There was no firewood left to warm them, no cloth to sell for a clean bandage. She looked at René, sweating despite the freezing cold, his eyes closed as if escaping pain. "I'll go to the monastery again," she whispered, wrapping herself in a worn shawl. René grabbed her wrist with sudden strength. "No. They won't help us. We're not their people." But she didn't listen. She stepped into the muddy street where village women drew water from the well, their faces pale with hunger and fear. Since the black sweat disease spread, everyone avoided touching each other. Even families splitting homes into sick and healthy sides. At the monastery gate, Eleonora knelt before Brother Eugene. "Please help us. My husband is dying." He looked at her with cold eyes. "We're ordered not to help sick people outside our walls. It's God's will. But you have medicine. I saw Brother Luther give it to rich merchants yesterday." He slapped her hard. "False accusations. You dare question the church?" She fell, her blood mixing with mud. When she tried to stand, he kicked her away. "Go, before I burn your hut and family with it." On her way back, she stumbled over a frozen woman's body by the road, her baby still trying to nurse from her dead chest. Eleonora didn't have the strength to cry. At midnight, scratching at the door woke her. It was Silas, the blind shepherd everyone avoided because of his cursed white eyes. "I heard about your husband," he said in a raspy voice, handing her a small herb bag. "Put these in hot water." She looked at him warily. "Why help us? They say you're possessed." He laughed bitterly. "I'm just a man who's seen too much. The church sells medicine too expensive for farmers, and disease spreads because they leave bodies out." He stepped closer, his cloudy eyes chilling despite their blindness. "There's a way to save your husband, but it's risky." Silas led her to a hidden forest cave where outcasts like him gathered, making secret medicines from rare herbs. Among them was Brother Luther, who she thought only served the rich. "The main church is corrupt," Luther said, checking René's wound. "We're monks and farmers who chose to fight back." But time was short. When Eleonora returned at dawn, feudal soldiers surrounded her home. "Where were you last night?" Priest Jeffrey shouted, waving a large cross. "They saw you with witches." René, still weak, tried to defend her. "She just got medicine." The priest laughed. "Medicine? From cursed Silas?" He signaled the guards. "Burn the house. Let this be a lesson." That night, as flames consumed all she had, Eleonora sat under a distant tree, holding a secret book Luther gave her, filled with forbidden medical knowledge and details of a hidden resistance. A year later, Val Thoroi was a ghost town, but in the surrounding forests, small groups moved at night, leaving medicine at doorsteps and saving abandoned children. One morning, Priest Jeffrey was found slaughtered at his altar, his eyes turned back as if he'd seen a ghost. Beside him, a note read, "The darkness births children who don't fear fire." Bells of death rang in the small village of Saint-Élie, signaling the world's end. No one knew exactly when the bloody plague began, but all knew the church fled first. Father Gaston locked the church's heavy wooden doors, hiding with minor nobles behind thick walls, eating stored wheat and drinking holy wine. Outside, Marion, a farmer not yet 20, tried to stop the black blood pouring from her son Pierre's nose. It mixed with her tears, frozen on her cheeks in the bitter cold. "You'll be okay, my love," she whispered, pressing a tattered cloth to his nose. But she knew the truth. She'd seen this bleeding before. In her neighbor Clara, who died vomiting black blood 3 days ago, and in her husband Louis, whom she buried yesterday under an apple tree. A sudden scream made her turn. Guards dragged an old farmer, Bernard, who secretly taught children to read, to the village square. "He's accused of stealing church bread," a guard shouted, tying him to a wooden post. Marion cried, "That's impossible. Bernard never stole." No one listened. The torch neared the wood under Bernard's feet. The smell of burning flesh mixed with the village's stench of death. His screams pierced the evening sky as Father Gaston watched from a high church window, wine glass in hand. That night, as Pierre choked on his blood in her arms, Marion swore the church would pay. The resistance wasn't a sudden idea for Marion. It grew like embers under ash, year after year. It began when she learned the church's hidden medicines weren't God's gift, but blood taxes collected from farmers for years. "Look, Marion," whispered Raphael, a young man blinded by whipping but sharp in mind, opening a small clay jar to reveal fine white powder. "This is red mercury. They mixed it with sick people's blood and sold it as holy medicine." Marion didn't understand every word, but she understood the betrayal. The rebellion wasn't just angry farmers attacking the church. It was a complex machine of revenge, built piece by piece, a secret network of exiled monks who knew the church's corrupt secrets, women called witches who knew forest herbs better than priests knew their holy books, and shadow children too young to be suspected but old enough to carry knives. On the night of the attack, heavy rain hid their footsteps. "The church won't burn!" a guard yelled as flames caught the side storerooms. But this fire was different. 10 years later, no one in the province remembered Marion the farmer. They all knew the Red Saint, whose blood cured the plague and whose prayers killed the unjust. When she fell at the White Castle battle, feudal soldiers tore her body apart. Legend says her heart kept beating even when placed on a spear's tip. The next morning, all the guards were found slaughtered, and the heart was gone. A thunderstorm struck Montferrat Castle when the deformed child was born. Midwife Marthe held the baby in trembling arms, her eyes wide with fear. The child had no eyes, just deep black hollows like haunted caves. "It's the devil's child," she whispered, backing against the wall. Duke Godfrey, the castle's lord, didn't hesitate. He grabbed the baby by its legs and held it up. "This is a sign. God punishes us for sparing rebellious farmers." Outside, lightning lit the sky, revealing dozens of crucified bodies on the castle walls. Farmers executed that morning for theft. Among them was Isabel, a beautiful farmer the Duke raped 6 months ago. He threw the child from a high window to the rocks below. But when guards went to retrieve the body, nothing was there. 15 years later, Volker hid among trees, watching the Duke's caravan cross the forest. His cloudy eyes, thought blind, saw what others couldn't. He saw tax wagons actually carried bound children. He heard guards whisper about rituals nobles held in the castle's cellars. As the sun set, Volker stepped out, not alone. Dozens of young people emerged from the trees, each with strange deformities. One with snow-white skin, another with 6 fingers per hand, another with a single large eye on their forehead. "Time to harvest," Volker said in a hoarse voice. Adelaide, a young nun, was cleaning the church floor when screams came from the cellar. No one was allowed down there, but curiosity led her to a crumbling stone staircase. Below, she found a terrifying secret room. Walls covered in strange symbols, glass jars with human organs, and in the center, a table with a child's open-chested body. Above it stood Priest Edmund in a black robe studded with odd golden symbols. "What are you doing?" Adelaide screamed. He turned, his eyes glowing unnatural yellow. "Ah, they sent me the last virgin." She fled into the dark, but tripped over another body, her own face, a dead twin stabbed in the heart. A secret door opened, and Volker with his group appeared. "Now do you understand?" he asked, offering his hand. "This is where they sacrifice us for immortality." During the castle's grand feast, nobles from nearby provinces wore silver angel masks. Duke Godfrey announced the final stage of their rituals. Suddenly, all candles went out. Crawling sounds came from the dark, then screams. Nobles saw the monsters they thought dead return. Not weak, deformed children anymore, but beings with dark powers. Volker could see people's dreams and steal secrets. Elias with 6 fingers controlled others' movements. Celine with one eye saw the near future. Godfrey tried to flee to his secret tower, but Adelaide waited, a strange mark on her forehead, the same mark carved on their victims. "You forgot something," she whispered, raising a holy dagger. "The cursed can become saints, too." 5 years after Montferrat's fall, the region became legend. Some say the storm's children still live in the forests, protecting farmers from noble cruelty. Others believe they became true demons. In an abandoned mountaintop monastery, Adelaide sat in a dark room watching a crystal ball show deformed children born across the kingdom, each with the mark. When Volker entered, he asked, "Are you ready? The great storm is coming." Adelaide looked at the horizon's gathering black clouds. "We began as victims. We'll end as the storm." In the distant royal palace, King Louis IX woke from a nightmare. On his mirror, written in blood, "The monsters are coming." The sun burned hot in July as Adhemar dug the dirt with his sore hands. Since dawn, He'd worked without stopping, but the pile of straw he gathered would barely earn a handful of wheat by day's end. He glanced at his 8-year-old son, Pierre, struggling to lift heavy water buckets with his thin body. "Papa, Mama says we have to go to church after sunset," Pierre said. Adhemar didn't answer. He knew why the church called them tonight. Soul tax, they called it, a pretty name for their yearly demand. Each family must give one child to work in the monasteries. Last year, they took his neighbor's son, Louis, and no one heard from him since. At dusk, while his wife, Isabelle, hid a piece of dry bread in Pierre's clothes, they heard the heavy church bell. Outside their hut, farmers gathered like sheep to the slaughter. Priest Auger stood on a platform in silky robes, waving a golden cross. "God's children. This hard year needs bigger sacrifices. The church needs workers to build a new holy place." Isabelle grabbed her husband's hand. "We won't give them Pierre. We can't." But Adhemar looked at Gaston, the feudal lord behind the priest with his long sword. Refusing meant losing their land, a death sentence in famine times. That night, as Pierre slept exhausted, Adhemar crept to the nearly empty pigsty. Under a pile of dung, he pulled out a rusty knife he'd stolen from the city market a year ago. "We'll go to the forest tomorrow," he whispered to Isabelle. "I heard there are men living free from the lords." Her eyes filled with tears. "And become hunted thieves?" "Better a thief than selling my child," he said. Just before dawn, they woke Pierre and packed their last bits of food. But when they opened the door, their old neighbor René stood in the dark. "They know," he whispered. Gaston sent guards to every house. From afar, they heard horses approaching. Running through the dewy fields felt like a nightmare. Pierre stumbled every few steps, and Isabelle carried their baby, Marc, who started crying. At the forest's edge, Adhemar turned to see dozens of torches behind them. "Go without me," René shouted suddenly. Before Adhemar could stop him, the old man ran back toward the pursuers, yelling, "This way!" Deep in the thick forest, they found something unexpected. Dozens of other families hiding among the trees, all with the same story. Claude, a tall blond man leading them, pointed to a hidden cave. "Here we live, here we fight." But Adhemar noticed something odd. All the children with them were deformed. One missing a hand, another with one eye, a boy with a strangely bent back. "The church wants them," a woman with a burned face whispered. "They call them pure offerings." A week later, Adhemar learned the awful truth. At night, Claude took children one by one to the cave's depths. When Adhemar followed secretly, he saw something he wasn't ready for. A hidden room with crude surgical tools where Claude tried to fix the deformities his own way. A small child's body lay on a stone table, its stomach cut open horribly. "You're mad!" Adhemar yelled, rushing at him. Claude turned slowly, his eyes gleaming in candlelight. "Better this than leaving them to the church. They do worse." By morning, Adhemar took his family and fled deeper into the forest. This time, Pierre held a small knife given by another runaway child. "They won't catch us, Papa," the boy said with eyes too old for his age. As the sun rose over the Lord's fields below, a new legend began forming in the forest's depths, one farmers would tell for centuries. Shadow's children, who chose death as free people over life as slaves. Amelia clawed the frozen ground with bloody nails. Since sunrise, she'd tried to dig up a few potatoes, while her 6-year-old son, Luca, watched the road, scared of feudal guards. "Mama, we're tired," he said, his voice rough from hunger. Before she could answer, they heard horses. Count Rinaldo, the feudal lord, towered over them on his black horse, wearing a fur coat worth more than the village made in a year. "This is my land. What's in it is mine," he said, striking her back with his whip. "Stealing means death." Amelia curled over Luca to shield him as guards looted their humble hut, taking their last jar of wheat saved for winter. That night, as Luca cried in pain, Amelia saw a strange mark on his back, red lines forming like a map. 10 years later, Luca was a lean but strong young man. The mark on his back grew clearer, but he hid it from everyone, even Sylvia, the girl he secretly loved. "I heard the Count searching for something in the mountains," Sylvia whispered while they gathered firewood. Luca felt an odd worry. The night before, he'd dreamed again of a cave with a stone door bearing his back's mark. When he sneaked to the mountain the next day, he found the unexpected: a headless priest's body, an old scroll about witches' treasure, and his mark carved on a large rock. The real shock came when he opened the stone door. No gold or jewels, but a living baby wrapped in royal rags, beside a strange glowing sword. Months later, the baby, Vincenzo, grew unnaturally fast. The sword seemed to whisper, and Count Rinaldo sent his whole army to find the cave. Luca learned the terrifying truth. We're not normal humans. We're witches' children, cursed to slavery. The mark was an ancient slavery seal, and the sword was what lords sought for centuries to end the bloodline. When the Count's army attacked the village, Luca and Vincenzo, now a grown man in months, stood before the farmers. "You have one choice: die slaves or fight as witches." The final battle was bloody. Sylvia died protecting children. Amelia found a hidden power to control Earth. Rinaldo revealed he was also a witch's descendant. When Luca drove the sword into Rinaldo's chest, an ancient voice whispered, "Blood unites, slavery ends." But victory cost dearly. Vincenzo began turning into a creature of shadow and fire, and the sword craved more blood. Luca realized the awful truth. Slavery didn't end. We just changed masters. The open ending leaves the rebellion's fate uncertain, starting a new legend of Clay's children who defied the gods themselves. Martha's hand shook as she tried to light a fire with wet twigs. The bitter cold pierced her thin clothes, but she didn't dare use more firewood, saving it for Christmas Eve, if they survived that long. She looked at her husband, Jacob, trying to fix their old plow for the 20th time this month. His cheekbones jutted under pale skin, his eyes sunken like dark pits. "The guards took our last 2 chickens today," Jacob whispered, not looking up. "They called it harvest tax." Martha pressed her lips to stop from screaming. She knew Lord Harold didn't care if they starved. He might prefer it. Dead farmers made fields more fertile, he always said. In the corner, their 6-year-old daughter, Anna, played with straw dolls, hiding her face when horse hooves neared their hut. "Not now," Martha begged softly. But fate didn't listen. The rickety wooden door burst open, and Sir Godfrey, the Lord's deputy, stood in shiny armor that looked absurd in their grim home. "A new order from our kind lord," he said, tossing a leather scroll onto the dirty floor. "Every able man works on the castle's new walls starting tomorrow." Jacob looked up for the first time. "But planting season? What'll we eat in winter?" a hard strike from Godfrey's metal glove knocked Jacob down. "Eat dirt like pigs!" After the knight left, the family stayed silent. Anna moved first, wiping blood from her father's lip with her small sleeve. The next night, while the village slept, Jacob sneaked to the Lord's field. He knew stealing wheat meant a slow death by burning, but seeing Anna lick an empty soup bowl made him not care. He dug the frozen dirt with bare hands until he found leftover harvest grains. As he filled his small pocket, a voice came from behind. "Jacob?" It was Thomas, their old neighbor who lost his sons in the last famine. He looked at Jacob's full pockets, then his face. "I won't tell," Thomas whispered. "But give me a handful for my boy's memory." After a week of hard wall building, Jacob returned to find Anna in bed with a high fever. Martha knelt beside her, wiping her forehead with a wet rag. "She hasn't eaten in 3 days," Martha said, her voice breaking. "Even the herbs I gathered are gone." Jacob noticed Anna's shallow breaths. He remembered Sister Bridget, who lived in a hut at the forest's edge. Everyone feared her, but they said she knew herbs. "I'll go to her," he said, pulling on his tattered coat. Martha grabbed his arm. "They say she knows black magic." "Black magic is what the Lord does to us daily," Jacob replied, stepping into the snowy storm. Sister Bridget wasn't what he expected. An old woman with a bent back but eyes clear as summer skies. "I know why you came," she said before he spoke. She gave him a small bag of green powder. "This will help the girl, but the price is steep." Jacob nodded, ready to give his soul if asked. "I'll take your memory of your first son, who died in the last famine." How did she know? Jacob had no other son, but he couldn't remember that now. All he knew was he must save Anna. "Take what you want." The powder worked as promised. Anna recovered fast, but Jacob noticed Martha sometimes looked at him oddly, as if waiting for him to say something. One day, while digging in the garden, he found a small wooden doll, half burned. A strange pang hit his heart, but he couldn't recall who made it or for whom. When harsh winter came, people died. First the old, then children. Their bodies were left outside the walls. The ground was too frozen to dig. On a freezing night, as the three huddled by a faint fire, someone knocked. "It's open!" Jacob called. Elias, a farmer who worked beside Jacob on the wall, entered, holding a small girl's body. "My daughter," he said, voice broken. Before she died, she asked to be buried with her doll. But we have nothing. Jacob looked at the burned doll from the garden. He didn't know why, but he felt he should give it. "Take this." As Elias left, Martha looked at Jacob with teary eyes. That was Matthew's doll, Anna's brother, who died last year. Jacob felt a knife stab his heart. Matthew. The name stirred something deep, but the memory slipped like smoke through his fingers. The next spring, when the ice melted, half the village was gone. Lord Harold sent a message offering kind help to survivors. new seeds if they worked double hours in his fields. Jacob stood with other farmers, listening. He looked at their empty fields, then at Anna playing in the mud in torn clothes. "We'll take it," he whispered. Martha gripped his hand. "We'll die of exhaustion." "Yes," Jacob said, staring at the clear sky. "But not this winter." Then he noticed Anna holding a new straw doll, just like the one he couldn't remember making for a brother no longer in his memory. Old Thomas, who barely survived, was the only one to notice Sister Bridget was gone from her forest hut. In its place were strange seeds and a note. "Plant them in the forest's deepest point. When harvest comes, you'll remember." But no one dared. They'd learned hope was too precious to lose in this world. The village suffered under a winter harsher than any in generations. Rivers froze solid, and trees bent under heavy frost like lost old women. In their crumbling hut, Martha tried to light a fire with the last bits of firewood Jacob had risked his life to gather from the Lord's forest, a crime that could cost him everything if the guards caught him. "Mama, my stomach hurts," said 6-year-old Anna, looking at her mother with sunken, sad eyes. Martha swallowed hard. "Come here, my love." She wrapped her daughter in their only wool scrap and sang an old song her grandmother taught her before dying of fever. In the hut's corner, Jacob checked their broken wooden plow, passed down from his father through 3 generations, now just rotting pieces. He lifted a broken plank and sniffed it oddly, as if trying to pull memories of better days from its scent. "The Lord will take the whole next harvest," he muttered. "They say the war in the north needs all the food." A tear fell on the old wood. He remembered his father holding his small hand, teaching him to plow. "The soil's like a woman, son. It needs a gentle touch." Now the soil was a cruel mother, refusing them enough to survive. At midnight, Anna woke to a strange clattering sound. In the dark, she saw her father's shadow moving quietly to the door. "Papa?" Jacob froze, caught. "Go back to sleep, my flower. Papa's just stepping out." But the sharp girl saw the knife glint at his belt. She knew where he was going, to the Lord's forest, where hunting royal deer was forbidden. The midnight forest was another world. Jacob crept through giant trees, knife in hand, heart pounding like a war drum. Suddenly a branch snapped. "Who's there?" he whispered loudly. From the shadows, the neighbor's fever-damaged boy appeared, pointing a dirty finger deeper into the forest before vanishing like a ghost. Jacob followed and dropped to his knees at what he found, a dead royal deer, still warm, with the Lord's arrow in its neck. Damn, he realized instantly. A guard had poached it illegally and left it to retrieve later. He glanced around in panic, then quickly cut the best meat. If caught here, his body would be torn apart in the village square. Before dawn, he returned to the hut, where Martha waited with red eyes. "You fool! Want to leave us alone?" Her anger faded when she saw the fresh meat he pulled from his coat. That morning, for the first time in months, the hut smelled of meaty soup. Anna danced around the fire, singing a silly song she made up, but the joy didn't last. That afternoon, warning horns sounded. They stepped outside to find the whole village in the square. On a wooden platform stood Sir Godfrey with the village butcher, chained. "This traitor stole from our Lord's stock," the knight shouted. The mangled deer's body lay before the platform. The butcher tried to protest. "I didn't. I have witnesses. I was—" One sword swing cut off his head. Blood sprayed the children in front. Jacob gripped Anna's hand and turned her face to his chest. But he saw silent accusations in some neighbor's eyes. Did someone suspect him? Would they escape or betray him? That night, as Anna slept under the effect of Martha's herbal tea, a soft knock came. Old Thomas entered, holding a small sack. "Take this. It's from last year's stores." Jacob opened it to find moldy grains, enough for a week. "I can't. I'll be with my boys soon," Thomas said calmly. "In heaven or hell, doesn't matter." Before leaving, he pointed to the hut's dark corner where the old straw doll sat. "Matthew made that for Anna before." He stopped, looking at Jacob with teary eyes. Forgetting's a blessing sometimes. Days later, they found Thomas dead in his hut, surrounded by his memories. Grandchildren's drawings, his late wife's clothes, and the doll he'd made for Matthew years ago. At his simple funeral, Jacob noticed Sister Bridget watching from afar with unusual interest. When their eyes met, she nodded mysteriously and vanished into the trees. In the weeks that followed, spring peeked through. But as the ice melted, the real disaster appeared. Bodies, dozens of farmers who died in winter, buried randomly under snow, now surfaced like forgotten nightmares. "The plague's coming," Martha whispered, smelling the rotten air. Jacob looked at Anna playing in the wet dirt. How would he save her? Where could they flee? All lands belonged to the Lord, all roads guarded. That night, as the village slept exhausted, Jacob sneaked to Bridget's hut again. The door was open, and inside was a small metal box with a note. For fever and forgetting. Beneath it, a map with fine lines pointed through the swamps to an abandoned mountain village. When he turned, Bridget stood in the doorway, her eyes gleaming in moonlight. Forgetting's a gift, but memory can be a stronger weapon. Before he could ask about Matthew, his son lost to memory, she vanished into the dark, leaving him with the hardest choice: stay and die, or risk his family's lives in the cursed swamps. In the hut's corner, Anna slept soundly, clutching the new straw doll no one remembered making. In the 20th night of the harsh winter, as a snowstorm battered the hut's thin walls, Anna woke to strange whispers from the dark corner. There, in the moonlight slipping through cracks, she saw a tall man's shadow she didn't know. "Mama, there's a man," she whispered, pointing with a trembling hand. Martha woke, startled, but saw only the old straw doll always in that corner, its origin forgotten. "Just a dream, my love." But Martha noticed something odd. The doll was in a different position, as if moved overnight. In the morning, as Jacob fixed the leaking roof, he heard rustling behind the hut. He found strange footprints in the snow, too big for his, unlike the Lord's guards. He followed them lightly to an old elm tree where he discovered a small hole dug at the roots, a linen cloth with dried blood, and a rusty knife with carved letters, M+J. Jacob didn't understand, but his fingers shook touching the knife, as if a bodily memory returned. Before he could think more, a scream came from the village. The floating body was the first sign of disaster. Eileen, the seamstress who died of fever 3 weeks ago, appeared in the frozen river, her eyes open as if watching, fingers clasped like praying. "Curse!" the local priest shouted, sprinkling holy water. The dead refused their graves. But Jacob noticed a chilling detail: Eileen's missing ring finger. The ring, the village's only precious trinket, always a topic of talk. That night, forgotten dreams returned to Jacob. A small boy playing in fields with Anna. But not Anna. Blood on the ground. Martha's loud sobs. Broken words. "Plague. Fever. Bury him quick." He woke sweating coldly. On the table, the knife he'd found gleamed in moonlight, as if someone cleaned it. The next day brought the biggest shock. At the well, Bridget waited. "You're starting to remember, aren't you?" she whispered, touching his forehead with icy fingers. "What are you doing to me?" Jacob trembled. She pointed to the small graveyard behind the church. "Go to the third grave from the north. You'll find the truth I took." Digging in the graveyard at night was a sin punishable by death, but curiosity beat fear. At the grave he found a broken, burned headstone, a small wooden box instead of a body. Inside, a torn doll, a piece of child's clothing, and a moldy note. "Matthew, our son, taken by fever Tuesday night." Jacob fell to his knees. Memories flooded back. A clever boy drawing on stones. The awful night his fever burned like coals. Bridget whispering, "I'll take the pain for your memory." On his way back, he saw shadows move among the graves. Not just his, but two. One big like him, one small, holding its hand. The next morning brought stunning news. 3 of the Lord's guards were found dead at the forest's edge, wounds not from any known weapon, but like beastly bites with human prints. Lord Harold declared an emergency, accusing farmers of rebellion. But Jacob knew the truth when he saw the straw doll in their hut covered in strange red stains. On the final night, as the storm calmed, the shadow returned to the hut's corner. This time, the whole family saw it. A small boy with messy hair and shining eyes, a hand stretched out as if asking for something. A faint voice, "Papa, why'd you leave me in the cold?" Martha moved first. With steady steps, she took the bloodied straw doll and placed it in the shadow's hand. "Go now, my love. Go to the light." In the morning, they found snow melting for the first time in months, small green sprouts in the frozen soil, Matthew's knife clean and shining on the doorstep. But most important was a new sack of fresh seeds with a note. "The crop will grow, hunger will end, but memories must stay. B." When they heard Lord Harold was found dead in his bed, no visible wounds, just eternal terror on his face, they knew the spiritual winter had ended too. In the hut's corner, a new straw doll appeared suddenly, this time with a smiling face and joined hands, as if holding a small child. Without explanation, Anna began calling it "my little brother."